All right.
Hi, this is Ferose VR, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
So, Feroes, you're helping build a better world. I love this. I love the fact that like we're pretty hard on ourselves here in the United States, and I know around the world, other people have similar kind of things where we think that we're non-inclusive and that we don't like diversity. But you are building a world where it is possible for someone with autism, maybe even severe autism, to go out and earn a living. And you guys just, but one of your, you do a lot, but one of the things you just were able to pull off is Google, who's never hired an autistic person, at least on purpose, is now going to work with one of your agencies to actively recruit and hire people with autism. Man, look at this world we live in, man. Someone with autism can be completely like professional at this point. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, congratulations to Google for taking that incredible leap of faith. And I like to point out two specific things that they have mentioned in their announcement. As you rightly said, I'm sure there are people on the autism spectrum who's probably Google has hired in the past. I'm not saying they haven't done it, but to have a focused hiring of people on the spectrum is something incredible. Because there's a beautiful saying that all of us are on the spectrum. That's the truth. So it's very hard to say that you are not or I am not on the spectrum. We just have different degrees of where we are, right? And the second thing is, I haven't really figured out how they are going to do this. I don't know if Specialisterne will be the partner or not. But one of the missions of Specialisterne, where I am one of the current chairman of the North America operations, is to help companies in the process of onboarding people on the spectrum. So, just to give you an example, a company like Wells Fargo, they made again a similar commitment saying, okay, we want to hire, say, X number of people on the autism spectrum in our company. Most of these companies, they are not experts in how to assess these people. What are the jobs they can perform? What's the support they need? What's the management training that people have to undergo? Because their needs are very unique in many ways, and that's the kind of service we at Specialist Turner provides. We are proud that we've existed for more than a decade. We have offices across 15 different countries. This was started in Denmark, and our operations in North America. We have a team of around 20 people, but we have the top companies who are reached out to us, and we help them onboarding people on the autism spectrum. Just to give you some numbers, this year we have already helped onboard 150 people on the autism spectrum into various companies.
Wow, that's incredible. So, yes, let's back up and let's learn a little bit about you, and then how did you get to this point where you're going to lean on this problem? And obviously, you're not alone, but let's back up a little bit and talk about how we got to this point and how did you get inspired to do all of this important work?
Yeah, so this goes back to the year 2010. So I may have to do a little bit of a rewind just to set the context for all the audience here. Uh, I live right now in Saratoga in California, which is basically the heart of the Silicon Valley. The Apple office is probably 2 miles away from my house. So this is really the heart of the Silicon Valley. But I moved to the US 7 years back. Before that, I used to be based in Bangalore in India. So 2010, I was actually the head of SAP Labs, which is an engineering organization. At that time, we had close to 5,000 employees, and I was based in Bangalore. And in many ways, I was living a dream life. I thought my life was perfect. I had married my college sweetheart. My son, who was at that time 18 months old, was the center of our lives, and my career was doing extremely well. But that's when I realized sometimes life throws you curveballs, and the way it happened to me was with the diagnosis of my son. After various doctor visits, the doctor said, "Okay, Feroz, your son is on the autism spectrum." I remember when the diagnosis happened, driving back home, me and my wife, we didn't speak to each other. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. And I said, "Here goes my perfect life." The first thing I asked the doctor is, "Okay, tell me what's the medication and how do you cure my son of autism?" And he said, "Firoz, there is no cure. This is a condition for life. What you can do is do therapies and hope that he becomes independent in the long run. And hopefully he can take care of himself." And that broke my heart, Pete, because I was always a problem solver. You give me a problem, I'll fix it. And here was a situation where my son was diagnosed and there was no fix. And so I went into a form of depression for some months, because every person who's gets such a severe blow, the first response is denial. You always say, why? I don't think this is true. I'm sure this will all be fine. Then after denial, you get to a point of, why me? Why did it happen to me? This is my only son. What have I done wrong? And then you have everybody around you who says, "Oh no, don't worry, he'll be fine." These are those false, sometimes people around you don't want you to believe the truth. And once I realized what it was, I didn't know what to do. I went into depression. And that's when a life-changing moment happened for me, when my mentor, her name is Dr. Kiran Bedi, who's a very famous Indian, one of the most popular Indians, who was India's first women police officer. She was a good family friend. She called me up and said, "Feroz, what happened? Why this radio silence? Why haven't you responding to my messages? Why haven't you called me up?" And I broke down and I said, "You know what? Vivan is diagnosed with autism. I don't know what to do." And Pete, he told me something that was the tipping point of my life, that changed my life forever. And she said, "Feroz, most people spend their entire life not knowing what their purpose is. You are incredibly fortunate. The purpose found you."
Yeah.
Yeah. And and that's it. She said, as a parent, you have to take care of him, but you're also in a position where you can make the world a better place for not just your son, but also for others who are similarly challenged. And for me, that's happened 12 years back, and that's been the mission of my life since then, to make the world a little better in our own small ways for the marginalized disabled community.
I saw a story on 60 Minutes. I don't know if it was a group that you're associated with, but it was a contract company that said, "Hey, we've got people with autism that are fantastic at these very specific high end skills. Matter of fact, they outperform
Yeah.
their and I'll say non-spectrumed
Yeah.
peers because they have the ability to focus and just their condition is such that it's suited to some of these roles like fantastically, and they can go out and these are people that otherwise would be seen in most other societies around the world would be seen as broken
Yeah.
and useless. And these people are making six figures plus,
Yeah.
So there is this marketplace. What is it when you walk to Google and you're trying to convince them to purposely hire people with autism? I mean, how come they don't just throw a book at you and have the dogs, release the hounds, and like get Feroes out of here? What I mean, obviously they don't do that. I'm being a little bit
Yeah.
silly,
Yeah.
but it is a big ask. Like, hey, I need you to hire a whole bunch of autistic people, and it's going to be really good for your business.
Yeah. So I think, if you ask me today, people are actually wanting to do it. But when I started it 10 years back at SAP, I had the same response. In fact, my HR team said, "Feroz, are you smoking? How the hell are you going to hire these people who are on the spectrum?" Number one, most of them didn't have college degrees, right? Because the education system in India did not allow them to pursue a higher education. So they didn't have college education. They never had worked in the past. They were not very social. And imagine when you walk into an organization, one of the things they expect you to do is to work in teams. And most autistic people cannot work in teams. They like to be on their own. So leave me alone, right? And they have a lot of anxiety when they meet other people. So these were all the things that organizations look for, which people on the autism spectrum can't necessarily demonstrate. And that's what our core thesis is. We feel that the entire recruitment system today, Pete, around the world, is based on rejecting people, not selecting them.
Hmm.
So if I look at numbers, I will get 100 resumes. I select one. So are you selecting one or are you rejecting 99? And so people say it's a selection process. The way I see it is, it's our inability to see what they can provide. Most of the times we go to the table and say, this is what I want, instead of saying, what is the skill they have, and can I try to find a task in my organization where they can add value. Because our core thesis is, we are not doing charity. This is not a charity approach at all. This is an approach where they say the people on the spectrum bring certain skills which are very useful for large companies like SAP, like Google, like JP Morgan, and so on. And it provides business benefit for the organization. So this is not charity. And that for me is a is a long shot, because it takes time and effort to find that match. And once you find that, they're incredible resources for multiple reasons. Number one, they are very loyal to organizations. In the tech world today, we have between 15 to 20% attrition.
Hmm.
Our data shows that SAP, we've hired more than 200 people on the autism spectrum across 10 countries. We have a 95% retention rate.
Wow.
They are incredibly loyal because they feel we've given them this great opportunity. Secondly, they are also extremely focused and hardworking, and they don't worry about a promotion, a salary hike. Not that they are not important, but all I'm saying is their attitude is just incredibly positive. And so these are all great business benefits for hiring people on the spectrum. And the most important one, which I jokingly say, is that they never lie, which is a very rare quality in anybody these days. They are always telling you the truth. You always want to listen to them, right?
Yeah. So you're saying they still may steal your lunch out of the fridge, but they're not going to lie about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me talk to the autistic dad in you there, because there's some questions here, because the dad of an autistic kid, I should say. So you've got a kid that, and I don't know how severely
Yeah.
impacted your kid's life is by autism, but
Yeah.
we both know people that have kids that are going to require direct parenting their whole lives.
Yeah.
So at what level can a company reliably employ someone who has autism? I mean, a
Great
guy I
question.
grew up with has Asperger's, got a college degree though, he can live on his own. He
Yeah.
absolutely, has, but he's, I would say, kind of rare in that regard, in that he was able to get through everything. He needed help, but he got through it all. What's the, for that autistic parent, parent of an autistic kid out there, what are we talking about? What's possible here?
Very good question. I think this is something that has to be deeply understood, that most of the tech companies that are hiring people on the autism spectrum are high functional. Many of them, in fact, have multiple degrees and double masters. So they are high functional, they know their gig, but in many cases, it's their social lack of social awareness and the ability to interact and present themselves in a way that is expected that has resulted in them not getting jobs, right? So they may not be able to crack an interview in a traditional form because they get anxious, they can't communicate properly, but they have great IQ levels. So as of now, most of the hiring is focused on typically high functional autistic people. Give you an example. My son is 12 and a half years old. As of now, he is 100% dependent on us. He's nonverbal. He has fine motor skill issues, so he can't eat his own food. So we have to feed him. I mean, it's very hard for him to be independently having his own food. And, he can't take a bath on his own. He can't clean himself. So he is, I would say, low functional in that sense. Is he fully independent? He's not. I don't know how he will turn out to be in the next 10 years. Will he be able to get a job? But as a parent, my mission is just one thing, is to make him independent so that he can take care of himself after we are gone. And I remember this is not about financial independence. I think that's the easy part. Uh, I think this is about dignity. And the day I learned this, Pete, was I was invited to a dinner by a very wealthy family in America. And they had a son on the autism spectrum. And they were inviting all the top, thought leaders in the autism world. And I was having dinner with him. And he had invited me. He said, "How can we provide more jobs?" And he said something very profound to me. He said, "Feroz, his net worth would be $2 billion." And he said, "Feroz, I have earned enough money for the next 3 generations. They don't have to work. But I want my son to earn $100 himself."
Hmm.
And he said, "It's not about the $100, it is about his dignity. He wants to feel that he is a meaningful contributor to the society." So I think being independent is one, being financially independent is other. But I think at the core of it, everybody wants to contribute in a meaningful manner. And I think this applies to every human being on earth. And I think that's the core why it is important that people feel they get an employment.
A lot to be said for creating dignity in the world, especially for someone who may have no idea how to get there if it's even possible. I mean,
Yeah.
that's quite a yoke to put on yourselves, because you're right. That dude's billionaire, and if his family's going to burn through $1 billion in 3 generations, damn, they're having a blast. Like
Yeah.
that's fast. But yeah, this is an important thing. Like if we're going to fail at this, let's
Yeah.
fail by going as far forward as we can and get to the point where like there is no way that we can come up with for this person to have independence.
Yeah.
And that's how we create independence for that person, is by pushing on that part of the problem.
And Pete, I'm very hopeful for everyone. And the reason I'm saying this is not because out of blind optimism, but because I've seen it possible. I remember I had when I was back in India, I was working with an organization called Enable India, and their job was to provide jobs for people with all kinds of disabilities, not just autism, but all disabilities. And they had this particular instance where there was this young, I would say, adult who had met with an accident, was completely bedridden, paraplegic. And his father came and said, "You know what, his mind is sharp, his body may not move, but his mind is sharp, but he can't move any part of his body except his eyelids, but he wants to be dependent." And we said, "Okay, that seems like a complex problem. How do we get that person to be independent and optimize his intellectual capability, not his physical capability?" We were able to find a job for him, Pete, where he could move his eyelids by blinking his eyes. He could actually literally type on a computer. And that way, it's incredibly complex, but it's doable. But it's really worth attempting it, because we believe that the most so-called disabled or broken person can also contribute in a meaningful manner. And I think that for me is the essence, that I'm not giving up on the idea that my son may be independent someday. I don't know. I just keep my fingers crossed and I keep doing my best as a father.
Yeah.
That maybe 10 years from now, there is technology, there is a way that we can optimize every potential of a human being.
When we scope back on disability, I mean, during my lifetime, things have dramatically changed. It used to be a freak show if you saw someone with a fake limb or
Yeah,
missing a leg,
yeah,
and just all of these things. You can serve. I'm a veteran. You can serve in the military if you're blind. Like you get blown up by a bomb and you have no eyes at all, like no chance of ever seeing again. And they're like, yeah, you can type, you can talk on a phone. We'll figure it out. And so what the term disability almost doesn't even apply, because a person in a wheel. I mean, look at Stephen Hawking. There's an
yeah,
ultimate example of someone that 100 years before would just be
yeah,
thrown away on the trash heap. So you have this guy
yeah,
that can only blink his
yeah,
eyes, but
yeah,
there's an intellect in there that's
yeah,
just waiting to have someone figure out how to untap it with them.
yeah.
What a powerful escape that is for someone who, they need help because they've got this thing limiting them. But once you get there, wow, what is going to be in their head?
Yeah. And I was very fortunate to be in touch with Judith Heumann. Judith Heumann is the legend behind the American Disabilities Act.
Right.
If one of her books is called Being Heumann, which is something I recommend everybody to read. There was a documentary called Crip Camp, which is all about the disability movement, how it all started, where Judith was an integral part of. And she said something very beautifully, and people can see this in the Trevor Noah show. People say that you are disabled and I am abled. If you are, and she said, sorry, that's not the definition. You are not abled, you are non-disabled, which means you and me are non-disabled. And the reason we are saying this is because the probability of you or me getting a disability in our lifetime, it could be temporary, it could be permanent, is very high.
Right.
So the reality is we will all be eventually disabled in some form. And hence, it becomes a moral obligation for us to fight for the rights of people with disabilities, because we are going to be there pretty soon. I can see you are wearing a specs. Many years back, if you didn't have a spectacles, you wouldn't be able to watch. You would be
Yeah.
partially blind, right? And so we don't consider you disabled right now because you have a tool that helps you to see.
Right.
So for all practical purposes, we may think we are abled, but we are actually non-disabled right now, because the chances of us becoming disabled in our lifetime, if you live long enough, is pretty high.
You look at the stuff that they've done with the Special Olympics as well, where you
Yeah.
have people that are. I always make a joke about the Special Olympics where you have like special forces soldiers who are like, I've lost my leg, and they're like, it's running super fast, but it's true, because you can have these calamities happen. You can get paralyzed by, I mean, how many Guillain-Barré, you could have a stroke, you could have any kind of thing, and then you lose significant amount of capacity. But we instantly want to get back to work the moment that happens. How soon can I walk without a limp? I've wrecked my ankle so many times playing basketball and everything, and that was always my sign. I'm like, can I walk straight, or do I have to have this kind of odd gait? And if that's true for us, that's true for anybody that has any kind of impediment from being perfect. And as you said earlier, we all end up on this spectrum of capability.
Yeah.
And when you're on the same spectrum, you can look and go, hey, you know what? I can help someone to my right or to my left, maybe get over a little bit and work together on these things and truly create that dignity that you're talking about.
And one of the key insights we've had in the last 10 years is that people who are born with one disabling condition has another condition or another skill that is massively amplified.
Mm.
Okay, let me explain this to you. If you are blind, your ability to hear and feel and touch is much more better than normal, so-called normal people. And so what we found is that if you are disabled, you have other conditions which are better. And so instead of focusing on the disability, you can actually focus on your enhanced ability and put that to use. Now, people ask me, okay, that's if you're born with a disability. What if you acquire a disability? And the other thing we found is, for example, if you lose one limb or one hand because of, I don't know, maybe an accident or something,
Right.
what happens is that you start using your other hand or other limbs so much more that just by sheer practice, you have enhanced your ability in that particular limb more than others can, right? So we always say every disabling condition goes hand in hand with an enhanced ability in some other condition. And so we shouldn't just focus on the disability, but if you focus on, we termed it cool ability,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's a much more profound thing to focus on. Like autistic people, they have massive attention for detail. That's a cool ability. Even though they have certain disabling conditions like socializing and speech, they have attention to detail.
Yeah.
Many of them have outstanding memory. We call them as cool abilities.
Mm.
And if you focus on the cool abilities, not so much on the disability, I think we will make the world a better place.
And again, as we work on these things, it's like battery technology. If we're desperate to make better batteries, you know, we start working on solving these problems. Maybe they're the small problems, but soon those problems get behind us because we have iterated into a 0.5% better solution, half a percent, and you can isolate some of these things and determine maybe someone who's pre-verbal or nonverbal, maybe they can just go out and work gangbusters at a specific task, whether it's math or whatever it is. Again, like you think about Stephen Hawking as the ultimate
Yeah.
example. He has this massive brain power and he's
Yeah.
publishing books and he's lecturing. And, people with ALS lose their voice because they lose the ability to push air through hard enough to talk and everything. But we can give them a voice now because Microsoft and other companies said so. They're like, yeah, let's just record your voice now. Or if you don't have a recorded voice, let's give you one. Would you like to sound like Snoop Dogg? Would you like to sound like Feroes?
Yeah. Yeah.
We can do these things. And all of a sudden, my buddy Phil has ALS, and ALS better watch out because Phil's coming after it, and whatever time he has left, he's going to push and he's going to blast holes through the maze and just go straight through things. And you can't, like you said, there's this limiting function, in this case, ALS. And then there's his passion, like, well, I've got this much time left. I don't know how much it'll be, but everybody better watch out. I'm going to be a force. And he's met with senators, congressmen, businesses, Major League Baseball. He's met with all kinds of people trying to improve the condition of people with ALS and help us understand what a monster that disease is. And I'll be damned if he's not doing it. So here he has a superpower because he's unencumbered by anything else now,
Spot on. And, one of the things that I wanted to share with the audience is a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve are focused maybe on the disability community, but actually it helps everyone. Just as an example, you can see the scrolling subtitles down on the below, right?
Yeah.
The genesis of this was to help a deaf person. The reason subtitles started was so that deaf people can understand what is happening. And I was very fortunate to meet Senator Harkin, Tom Harkin, who was instrumental in passing the American Disabilities Bill. And he gave me an award in Washington, D.C. And he told me this story. He said his brother was deaf. And he said, every time we watched television, my brother couldn't understand what's happening because he couldn't hear the dialogues. And that is when the first time, he said there was a big box which used to basically, you have to insert that into your television and somebody will manually do the subtitling of an episode, and then you have to find a way to put it in so that the subtitles come. And he said he got two of those technologies, two of those boxes. One he gave to President Jimmy Carter. One he kept it for himself so that his brother could see some of these television episodes and see the subtitles and understand. And that's how it all started. And he said after that, he fought to make sure this was available for everybody. And hotels then started having these special televisions where you could insert these cassettes so people who are deaf can use it. That's how the whole movement of subtitling started. This was like more than 30 years ago. And today, every program has a subtitle. And guess what? It's not the deaf people who want it. It's the other people who want it because, you may not understand the accent in which the person speaks. You may be sitting in a bar and everybody is loud and you don't understand the news, so you see the subtitles. So what started as a solution for people who are deaf is actually used by everybody around the world.
Yeah.
Today, I'm able to watch a Netflix movie which is in Spanish because of the subtitling. And that, for me, is the power of solving a problem for the outlier because it helps everyone.
No, this is a great point. And we just recently had a subtitled movie, right, win Oscar awards. And just because it was in Korean, we were all able to watch it.
Exactly.
I use hearing aids because, I have a lot of time in combat zones. I've been blown up a lot. And so I don't hear so good. I can hear all right. I'm like, I hear you. I've got one hearing aid on, but it's not really doing anything because I can hear with this. but certain accents, certain sounds when I watch TV. So I have subtitles on all the time. And do I need them? Yeah, I do. There's plenty of times where I have no idea what they say, especially if they have an accent. It's
Yeah.
really hard. Like I watched that Dairy Girl show on Netflix, and I'm like, I don't know what they're saying. And there's enough colloquial stuff in there that now I can look up what what crack is when they say crack, and I'm like, I don't know what that even means. Then you look it up, and all of a sudden you have this whole new understanding, and that that all ties back to the subtitles. If you go watch an opera, you don't speak Italian, you don't speak Russian, you don't speak German, you don't speak French. Well, there's subtitles right there, and you can enjoy an opera in a different language. Your inability has become washed away. So I love these things. We've talked about the parents a little bit. We've talked about the capability of folks with autism. What about the community at large? I know this is a big thing, especially, and look, you come from India, so you've got some international perspective on this.
Yeah.
um, I've got a friend that has adopted two boys from China. And if you're a disabled kid in a place like China or other, I imagine India has to be at the
Sure.
same point. It can be horrible.
Mm.
And I mean, like a miserable, miserable existence for someone who has disabilities. What are you guys doing on that front to try to erase some of the stigma,
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I would say when I compare, and I can only speak about India because I've grown up there for my first 40 years of my life. Disability is seen as a taboo topic even today. People don't speak about it. I'm not, maybe urban cities, it's a lot more open, but rural parts of the country, majority of the country, disability is still seen as a taboo. We have a very progressive law, but the law is not very implemented in the spirit which is meant to be. Like how the American Disabilities Act, we had our own Disabilities Act, which is, as I said, pretty progressive. But I think before anything else, we have to change mindsets. And that's the hardest part. You cannot say, let's find jobs for people with disabilities. That comes much later. First is to change people's mindsets to make it more acceptable, and not just acceptable but celebrate people differences. And I think we are a long way away from that. To solve that issue, I started my own foundation called the India Inclusion Foundation, and our fundamental goal is to spread awareness of people with disabilities and their rights as much, for the 1.3 billion people. India is I jokingly say, it's a very small country, just 1.3 billion people.
Yeah.
So it's a complex problem, right? To enable people to know their rights is a lifelong mission. um, and we do something called the India Inclusion Summit, which is one of the world's largest events for people with disabilities. It's like the TED for people with disabilities. And the idea is to celebrate and showcase their abilities so that it becomes much more acceptable. So there's a lot of things we are doing to spread awareness in India. I think purely when I compare it with US, we are still at least 2 decades behind the US in terms of awareness, acceptance, accessibility.
When you look at history of the US and our ability to adapt to some of these things, as much again as we're hard on ourselves and we think we're completely intolerant and a bunch of jerks, which we are, but we also, we move the needle on things early because of our ability to say, yes, this person is entitled to have a life, to have freedom.
Yeah.
And so we can look around and be like, you know what? It's been over 30 years that
Yeah.
we've had the Americans Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
And that's George Bush signed that into law.
Yeah.
It's so established and ingrained. We don't even think about how powerful that legislation was, and it was coming in the 80s. We were working on it and there were committees and everything else, but it got signed in and it completely changed how we look at things. And I don't think we even realize what a monumental shift that piece of legislation was.
It is. I think it's one of the most landmark, bills that were ever passed. And I can tell you my story, why I feel this is so incredible. And a lot of people just don't understand it because I came from outside and really saw it. So my son was, as I said, nonverbal, which basically meant people in India didn't know what autism was. He was not able to speak, so he couldn't go to a school. Basically, he had to be at home and homeschooled. That's when I moved to the US. I landed here on 13th of August, 2014. On 16th of August, 3 days later, he went to school. And I had tears in my eyes when he boarded the bus, because I never thought my son could ever go to school. Because the law says every individual has the right to go to a school. No school in the country can deny a person education, irrespective of what his ability is. It is the state's and the school's responsibility to give that education based on his condition. That is incredibly powerful, which says that nobody is left behind. It doesn't matter what your condition is. And for me, it was not just a law which was signed in, I think, 1988 by George Bush, like you said, but it is real. There is an implementation of it. As I said, I moved here, and within 3 days, he went to a school. And I never thought my son would ever get to a school. And so I think we are one of the most progressive laws. Today, accessibility is taken for granted. It doesn't matter whether you are on a wheelchair or not. Nobody can deny you the right to go to a restaurant, go to a pub. Not just deny, you can be, people can sue you if you're not allowing them. That's incredibly powerful. You don't have to fight for it. Most countries in the world, by the way, they are far from that. And so I
Right.
think we sometimes take for granted what this country has to offer. Of course, there's a lot of work still needs to be done. You're never perfect, but I think there's a lot of great work that has already happened.
I think you're right about that. I mean, there's always more work to do, but look at the work we've been doing. It's not that we're going to stop doing work. Let's just let's let this good work actually be good work that results in positive change. Again, disability is totally different. We're changing our sights on what is. I've got so many friends that have some kind of largely invisible disability. Like my hips
Yeah,
hurt all the
yeah,
time. The
yeah,
government recognizes that my time in combat hurt my back, my hips, all these things. So I don't have a handicap placard. I probably could pursue it and get it, but I'm okay for the most part. But if I had one, it might appear that I'm fine, but maybe I'm having a good day. Maybe the next day I have to go get acupuncture to get out of bed. So we've got to lighten up a little bit on this judgment of people who are trying to do the best they can with what they got. Do some people abuse the law and get a better part? Oh, sure. Okay,
of
great.
course.
Whatever, right? But I'll take those and make sure that people who I've got a friend who does this all the time. He parks in handicapped spots if he's having a bad day. And if not, he parks in a regular spot. He doesn't mind it. But we give him that allowance because
Yeah,
he's carrying more weight than the rest of us are, physically. And these, I think, are big differences. It's also one thing to pass a Disabilities Act. It's another thing to be able to enforce it,
yeah,
and in a way that actually creates the change that we wanted. And boy, I mean, what a difference in the last 30 years and
yeah,
leading up to that. It's remarkable. And I'll say this too. On the special education side, we've always had this stigma of special education. But if you're someone who has a specific learning disability, and we can overcome that with a specific response, whether it's someone who goes around with you and takes your notes for you or whatever it is, that person still can be educated at a high level. They just they have this one part of their brain that doesn't track the way you want it to track, whether you've got dyslexia or whatever it is. Yeah, you're deaf. You just need subtitles. Okay, great. Like, why not let that person have the that dignity to have independence? It's remarkable that we're doing these things. How much work is there left to do here in the US, would you say? And then what about abroad in Europe and other places that are maybe more tolerant to the disability movement?
if I just compare across the world, and this is interesting because different countries are, I found, are at different levels. I would say US and UK are probably the most progressive in the world in terms of the disability rights. I would say, I mean, I made one small error when I said it's 1988. It's 1990 when the American Disabilities Act was
Mm.
passed. So there's a small correction there. But as I said, if I look at India, India have a very progressive disabilities law, but the implementation is flawed. There's a lot of work to be done. Just to give you an example, in the Indian law, it says that if you mistreat a person with disabilities, it is a criminal offense, which means you can go to jail. That's very powerful. So if you say something wrong about somebody, you are actually behind bars. Is this implemented? Well, we can question that, but at least there is a progressive law. There are many other countries which I was fascinated by. like countries like Colombia. I've been to Colombia, and they have a very progressive law. And the reason is a significant portion of the population is disabled because of the long civil war.
Yeah.
So they have made a lot of adjustments for people with disabilities. There was a very fascinating thing that I found in Spain. This is like blew my mind off, that the employment of people who are visually impaired, so-called blind people, is higher than the sighted people.
Wow.
So if you are blind, you have a higher chance of getting a job than if you are sighted. This is in Spain, and there's a case study done on that. And why did this happen? And because what happened was the government figured out that how do I provide employment for people who are visually impaired, and they started something called a lottery. And so a lot of these blind people are given opportunities to sell lottery tickets and so on. And suddenly there have a lot of people who are visually impaired but have jobs which are meaningful. Now, I'm not just lottery, but that's how they started. But it's fascinating that more visually impaired people have jobs than the sighted people. So I think different countries have had different contexts, and so that determines it. But at the
Yeah.
end of it, my personal take is you have to change mindsets and people's attitude before everything else, and that takes time.
Let's talk to those parents again of people of kids that have some kind of limiting disability thing. How do they map out? My kid's pre-verbal, but
Yeah,
it's pretty with it. Maybe they could have a job. I haven't got the first clue on where to start. How do we help these folks get closer towards resources? Because I
yeah,
know I'm not the first person to just kind of be learning about what you're doing.
yeah. No, I think again, the access to resources differs from place to place. And if you are in California, then there are there are a lot of groups, and I would say there are a lot of parent groups, which is typically the best place to go. I always say be part of a parent group. And today with technology, with WhatsApp, is just so much easier. The best advice I have got, Pete, is from fellow parents. It is not from the state, it's not from the government, but fellow parents who have had a similar journey of as mine. They have the most invested in the success of the child. And so be part of groups in your local communities. That is where you will probably find the most insights. And of course, there are so many other mediums. What you're doing right now, it's just one platform, right? You're
Right.
spreading awareness. And so now people know, okay, autistic people can be employed, and they can do a Google, and they can figure it out. And so there is, you know I think each one of us can contribute. What you're doing is maybe a small part, but it's an important part.
Yeah.
So I think there are so many sources, but I would say embed yourself in the local community, because that is where you're going to get the best help from.
And then one of the things I've learned from talking to some blind folks that have been on the show is that parents of blind kids, in particular, a lot of other kids that have some kind of disability, are often overprotective.
Yeah,
And so for that blind kid to be able to go out, they got to go with Eric Weimeyer. And
yeah,
he's like, just run. Nothing's in the way for a quarter mile. You just keep running as long as you want. We'll let you know if you have to stop. And so a kid for the first time ever can go out and do that. And he talks about like just kids being allowed to go check the mail, but because their parents are so protective and in the right way, because they're parents.
yeah,
But sometimes we need we need that coach to grab us by the face mask and be like, get your head in the game, kid. And the kid's like, oh yeah, that's right. The parent hates seeing that, but that kid loves it, loves knowing that they can push harder. So what about those kind of resources where we can get parents out of like the care and fear business and more into the pushing and like you can do this business?
yeah. Very, very good question. And I think, it's always a delicate dance between,
Right.
how much of protective you want to be, but how much of freedom you want to provide. I think it's to each his own. Um, um, and I think people have to figure out what's the right balance themselves. But there are some incredible things that I wanted to share that I have access to from the state. For example, see, my son requires constant support, so one of us have to be with him. My wife was also working in the technology world, and she had to quit a job and kind of
Right.
take care of her son. She's working part time right now. But there are two things which I found was fascinating. Number one, the state allows you, say 10 hours per month, where the state will send somebody to take care of my son, which gives time for me and my wife to go shopping, watch a movie, go for a dinner. Because what happens is, this is a struggle for life, and
Right.
sometimes we lose our own sanity,
Hmm.
right? And if somebody can support us, say we can take care of your son for 10 hours in a month, and go ahead and figure out what you want to do, I think it's incredible. So we have access to that. Of course, it took us some time for us to get all the things, because then the state sends a person who's trained to handle my son's needs. It's not some random babysitter. It doesn't work because his needs are very unique. Based on his needs, they will send somebody who can take care of him, and we can take that break. I think that's fascinating. The second thing it does is that it pays my wife some hourly money for the fact that she's not able to work and earn herself, even though she's capable. So they say, okay, you're spending 5 hours taking care of your son. I will pay you $15 per hour, just to make sure that taking care of your son is not an economically bad thing to happen. I always say,
Right.
in GDP, you measure only how much money you get paid, but
Right.
nobody pays for bringing up their child.
It's
And I
so
think
true.
this is so bringing up a child is not part of a GDP calculation, which is so flawed, which I think is the most important thing a mother
Yeah.
can do, but they contribute zero to the GDP. Why?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. GDP is a number. It is a number we got to get past, and we are, I think, in the age of digital currency that we're going to start creating. Well, and you probably know 10 times more than I know about this, but the ability to assign value to things. Like,
Yeah,
okay, you're going to stay home and be a parent. Let's just say a mother that stays home with your kid. That's invaluable. Like, you cannot put
absolutely.
a well-raised kid in a safe, just read books read to it. I mean, everything about that, you just can't put a value on it. I mean, society, it's exponentially better. I also think about the challenges of having a kid with special needs, and Team Hoyt, the Hoyt family, Dick and Rick, the guy that would you push his son and they would do
Yeah.
marathon. That dude was just below world like class level, had a heart attack running the one time, and he's like just kept on running. He's like, I felt kind of weird at mile 12, but I just kept running. And they had this remarkable life, but the marriage couldn't withstand it. It's a lot of stress. How do
It
you
is.
and your spouse do it? I'm not trying to get into your personal
No,
business,
not at
but
all. Yeah. No,
but
this
you
is
know,
a
yeah,
such a great question, Pete, because data shows that um, 60 to 70% of couples who have special kids end up in a divorce, or the marriages don't work. But what is interesting is they say that in 10 to 15% of the cases, the marriages become stronger.
mm,
And the reason is, as long as the husband and wife have found a common mission, which is a child, it becomes stronger.
mm,
And I can tell you that typically what happens is, the fathers, and again, this is not to generalize and
right,
oversimplify, I'm just telling you from my own experience, the fathers end up becoming the breadwinners, and they focus on the career, and the mothers focus on the child, because a mother is a mother, they're never going to give up on the child.
right,
And so there is no convergence. The father is going in one direction, the mother is going in another direction, and so there is never a convergence, and that's when things fall apart. I can tell you, I used to go for my son's special needs classes. I was the only male in my class, only male. Fathers don't think it's important to be part of the education process. Today, in my case, and I found this at least the best case thing, is to be an equal partner in raising your child.
mm,
You know, I do his my wife does most of the classes, but I do at least 30% of his special classes with him. I go for his therapies, I go for his medical needs. And I think as long as both couple becomes equal partner, at least in the spirit, I'm not saying it can be equal 50-50, but
right.
I think as long as both of you contribute and your purpose is the same, which is to maximize the potential of your son, I think that's the only way relationships will last. Because as long as both of you have found the same mission, then your relationship actually becomes stronger.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you're right. Sharing some of that load, the actual sharing, like go help with the kid.
Yeah.
It's hard on the other spouse side, like, hey, I have to go work these 80 hours to provide
Yeah.
enough money for us. And as a work-life balance problem. And then you get fixated on that and you can be a little
Yeah.
distracted. And that can be hard. That's harder to fix, but you're right. Being involved with teen kid and getting that kid as good as they can, that's a big thing. We've covered a lot of ground and we've talked about, I mean, just about everything. What do you want to make sure we cover here in these last couple of minutes?
If you look at a macro level, people often ask me, how can I help? Yeah, and I always say, not everybody needs to, you know, do things that changes the world. I mean, if it happens, great. But I think if you can't help somebody yourself, help someone who's helping somebody else. That's
Yeah.
fine too. There's nothing wrong with it. I can do what I can do because I've been blessed with some skills. Everybody doesn't have to do what I'm doing. But if you're doing something meaningful, I would say help you to achieve your goals. So that's the first. The second is, if you fundamentally live a life with a simple lens that my mission is to lift people up and not to put people down. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's disability, whether it is something else. As long as your mission is to lift somebody else, even by a small inch, I think that's a life well lived. Don't waste your time trying to put people down. I think that could be my only advice. And the last thing that I often say is, if you do good things, don't waste your time trying to prove it. Just keep
That,
doing your good stuff. People will figure it
that's
out.
I love it. That's all good things. Yeah, and instead of feeling bad, go do something.
Yeah,
Don't reinvent the damn wheel. Go
yeah.
find an organization that does what you want to do and help them. Crying out loud, we don't need more charities. We need more people in the charities doing things. If that person who's an HR person who's like, "Hey, I didn't realize you guys existed. I want to start talking about how to hire some people with autism." Where do they go to get more information so that they can start to move their company towards a goal like Google just did?
You can go to my website. It's called ferosevr.com, and you can contact me directly from the website. So there's a contact page. You can reach out to me. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm there on LinkedIn. So anywhere you can reach on those social media platforms. My website actually has everything that I spoke about is in some form written, and so it's in the public domain. So everything what I've said is there. You can read about it in detail. Feel free to reach out to me, and I promise that I normally respond within 24 hours if I'm not traveling or somewhere. But
Yeah.
you will always get a response from me, especially if it's to do with autism or employment or disabilities. I'm very passionate about it. More than happy to share more insights.
And he does respond. I mean, that's how I got him on the show. All right, here's my final thing I want to ask you about. You must have had your mind blown by somebody who's got autism and went to work and did something incredible, something in that vein. Do you have a mini case study where you can say, yeah, this guy, and then he did, and then
Yes,
wow, we were all just shocked. Go ahead.
yes, yes. So I'll tell you at SAP, and this is I can send the link also on the chat window, which you can share.
Yeah, I'll share it.
Um, so we started the program. I started the program in 2011, 2013. It became officially called Autism at Work, which, as I said, is now in many companies. In 2019 was the day when I was like really happy about what happened. And that was because at SAP, we have something called the Founders Award, which is given to one team which does world class innovation, an innovation that can really change the world, change the company. And in 2019, SAP for the first time gave what we call as the Hasso-Plattner Founders Award to an individual. We made an exception. We didn't give it to a team. Remember, SAP is a 100,000 people company. So this is not a small thing. It's like the Oscars of SAP. And the award was won by a guy whose name was Nicholas Neumann. And he was a person on the autism spectrum. So the most innovative person at SAP across 100,000 person was a person who was hired as part of the Autism at Work program in Argentina.
Wow.
And for me, that was a proof point that this is not just PR stuff and feel good stuff. This is something that has helped the organization and, of course, helped the individual. For me, that is like a incredible case study that hiring people on the autism spectrum makes a lot of business sense.
I love it. I love it. I love, like, these are the things, out of 100,000 people, I mean, we're talking a fraction of a percentage point. And if it works for SAP, it works for Google, it'll work for you. Hey man, listen, I really appreciate you coming on. Anything you want to say in closing?
Nothing. Thank you so much for listening to me. I've just shared the YouTube link on the chat about Nicholas Neumann winning the Founders Award. I think there can't be a better testimony that this is the right thing to do. I'm grateful, Pete, for inviting me to the show, and my gratitude to you, and more power to you for spreading all the good things around the world. Keep doing.
Well, thank you very much. All right, stand by. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.